situation where one day I'm in Chicago. I'm running 6 or 7 offices, and in one of our branches, we had a bunch of FBI agents show up, and they took the computers and they were scaring everybody, and it was terrifying, and it started a period of time which is, I call it my darkest hour, and it wasn't just a day or a year. It lasted 7 years, actually.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to a fantastic and fun Fearless Founders podcast. Ike and I learned so much from all of this. And today, my dearest friend, Brandon Bliss, who is an entrepreneur, has had 5 company exits, is here to be real and grounded. And he is understated, so we're going to have to prod him to get more out of him. But with that said, Brandon, welcome. We're really happy to have you. Tell the gang, tell the whole listeners and the viewers a little bit about your background.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me, and I hope I'm interesting enough that this podcast does well for you. A little bit about me. I grew up in Connecticut. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. I was, mowing lawns and starting little companies growing up from as long as I can remember. I came to play football for the Utes, so I'm a diehard Utah fan. I served a mission in Uruguay. I graduated with a degree in finance, met my wife my junior year, and married my landlord. She was my landlord at the University of Utah. She's awesome. We moved to Chicago right after we graduated, had 5 children out there, started a company with some friends right out of college, never ever really worked for anybody else my whole life. And I was a B student, massive extrovert, very, very hungry and competitive. And that's the brief, I guess, bio of who I am.
Yeah, you're a stud. He's
so
great.
When you say you're extrovert, and you say you may not be interesting, it just doesn't go together.
Yeah, we'll see.
Hey, I happen to know a few things, Ike, about Brandon. And one of the things is that he is an expert marksman. He takes all of those courses, like the John Wick courses, where you're going around and shooting targets around active, enemy and all that. Right, Brandon?
Yeah, that is an odd hobby that I fell in love with, that we would travel to Las Vegas. There used to be a company called Front Sight out there. You choose a different weapon system, and you have to do a 4-day course and compete against all these, police and SWAT and military guys. And it's a weird hobby that I got into, but I fell in love, and I can use most weapon systems pretty good, probably better than the average American. And yeah, we're armed to the teeth over here.
Yeah. And his natural guns are pretty huge too, so you got to be careful with this.
Shine.
Hey, so let's go into business. This is fun. Part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because there are so many of our viewers are first-time founders, business owners, creators, and they're struggling through lots of challenges. At the same time, they're caught in the heady mix of success. And one day can be absolutely fantastic, and the next hour plummet to the lows, all within, the same day. And you've done so many businesses throughout your lifespan. So tell us 1, 2 elements of what you've really learned about running a business and what it takes to succeed. You're also an athlete, because I can go that way too, because athletes are competitive and they won't give up. And so there's so many parallels. Even 1 or 2 items that you can think of for now, and we can go deep or we can stay up high. Tell us some of the counsel you'd give.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think there's it's wonderful if you choose to be an entrepreneur and start a business, and you choose that path in life. It can go very well for you, but I always tell people it's not for everybody. It's a decision that impacts every facet of your life, from your family to your friends, neighbors, it's a heavy load, and you have to be extremely tough, willing to take punches, willing to get setback, disappointment. It can be hard some days. And so if someone is up for that and wants to do that, there can be a lot of upside. But a lot of people choose to work for other people and get a high paying corporate job and grow. And that's great too. That there is some stability there, and maybe the ability to turn it off and go home. When you decide to be an entrepreneur and start a business, as probably most of your followers here know, that they're choosing a little bit more difficult path, at least in the beginning, that startup phase. It's just setback after setback as you grind and try to get to profitability. And yeah, it's not for everybody. So I would say, hey, don't think that if you're a business owner that you can have all this time and life is easy, and it definitely is not that way, at least in the beginning. It's tough. I think the three of us probably understand that as you agonize about how to do it right and build it. That's at least what happened for me with pretty much each of those companies that we started and were part of it. It was tough in the beginning. The athletic background, getting beat up on a field and having to deal with hard days and 3-a-days and weather and difficult, that all just kind of is part of preparation, or at least my preparation, to kind of deal with the challenges of starting a business. So I think that helped. I think an LDS mission does that too. Getting doors slammed in your face, that always helps. So yeah, those experiences were definitely ideal and helped me personally. But it's not for everybody.
Yep, I understand that.
Yes.
Especially at the start. Ike is starting a brand new business, Brandon, again, from scratch.
Tell me about it real quick.
We're not supposed to do any commercials, but I'll make an exception for you, Brandon.
Thank you.
My partner and I realized that a lot of companies, especially seed to Series B, like starting companies, struggle with onboarding new employees. So we decided to build a platform. The AI is gonna onboard these new employees. We're starting from sales, and these guys can be trained on the company background, how everything's operating, the systems, the products, the domain, and then they can practice with the AI-based customers, not the real ones. So when they graduate in a few days or 2 weeks, they're like as if they've been working there for a year.
Sweet. That's awesome.
He's compressing the time it takes to get everyone on board with maturity and experience. And it's a fantastic area, especially for salespeople, as you know how long it takes to get them up to speed.
Yep.
So it's fantastic. Yeah. And and Ike is using a partner. And I happen to know you well enough, Brandon. Tell us what the positives and negatives of partnerships are, with examples and stories. Because I've done so many partnerships. Partnerships are fraught with risk, but they also are essential. What's your take?
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most important things that you need to think about and not jump into. It's almost like marriage. Like, you want to really get to know your partner before you take that huge step. And I think a partnership, it's very similar. You're going to spend so much time, so much, time and blood, sweat, and tears working together. And so you want to make sure that they are people you enjoy, people you want to be around, someone that's compatible to the way you see the world. And I've had, very awesome, incredible partners. Maybe I had other partners that maybe weren't as incredible and were more of a challenge, but learned a ton from each of them. I think as with what I know now, I would be 1,000 times more careful in who I partner with. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the partners that I've had. I've learned from all of them. They've been great, and I'm sure they would say the same thing about, you know, maybe partnering with me. But yeah, it is very, very tough. You want to be very careful about who you partner with. One of the things I did at my biggest company, that I think was pretty unique, that it might be worth sharing on this podcast, is I went through a pretty difficult time, and eventually got control of the entire cap table of a large medical equipment company, and chose to partner with 3 individuals that I thought could help us, you know, open the next chapter and go big with. And one had an operations background, one had a marketing background, one was a pure sales guy. And I knew these gentlemen for a decade before I decided to do this. I knew where their strengths were and their weaknesses were, and none of them were perfect, and neither was I. But I thought that there was good synergy, and we could scale quickly with that partnership. And I was so convinced of that, I actually gifted them some equity, and was in an effort to be extremely generous. I even covered the taxes on the transaction, and we set our salaries at the same exact amount. Even though I was the majority owner and had been around the longest and took the most risk, I put my salary at the same level as them, the same bonus structure, and we locked arms and said, we're gonna grow this together, and we're gonna win or lose together. And in the end, that paid off. I remember my attorneys, you know, getting very nervous when I indicated that I was going to do it this way. And I think, you know, some of my advisors at the time thought it was a little bit crazy, but these were dudes I really loved, that had been with me for a long time, that had gone through a really hard thing with me. And so I was loyal to them, and they had the skill set that we needed. This is one of those, you know, that's one of those times that it actually worked. We were able to grow it very aggressively for, you know, 4 years, and then had a really nice exit.
That is abnormal. And Ike is jumping in as well. That is abnormal. I want all of our listeners and viewers to know that what Brandon just did is not by the book. And it's an extraordinary display of generosity, but he also had gut instincts and 10 years of experience. I would never recommend on this podcast to do what Brandon did.
Yeah.
But it's like my first company was very similar. Even though I was the founder, I had brought my boss's boss from the corporate job I had to be the CEO of the company, and we had the same gig, like same salaries, same bonus structures, and all that. And then after that business was acquired, for about a hot second, my ego kicked in. I can do everything myself. I don't need a partner. And then I called a board member, and I was like, hey, can you just give me some feedback? Like, you know me by now. What is my strength, weaknesses? He said, Ike, maybe, you know, you should find a partner on your next job, you know, the co-founder. So I am like, it's Brandon, what is it? Is it like there's so much work to do, or you could probably hire people that has similar backgrounds as those partners, but why did you bring them in? What was the thought process? Like, why didn't you do it yourself?
I got to the point where I understood that if you really want to scale, you got to get out of the way. You got to get the right people on the bus, put them on the right seats, trust that they can do their job, and get out of the way. So when I was an early founder, obviously everything went through my desk. I was not the CEO. I was not the leader that the business needed. So it was me that was holding it back for so many years. And then when I learned those lessons about delegation and hiring people that are smarter than you, and being okay that you're around a table and you're not the smartest one at that table, like, that's a really, really good thing. And once that happened, I found experts that were better than me in operations, better than me in marketing, better than me or as good as me at sales, and allowed them to put their entire effort into that part of the business so that I could work and direct the music and look at the bigger strategy, look at the culture, look at the vision of where we were going, and have people that I trusted that were just going full throttle in those different areas. And they could do it honestly better than me because of the focus. I was pretty good jack of all trades, and I was able to be dangerous in most areas, but I'm a one person. And until a founder understands, like, it'll never grow unless you can develop that team around you and empower them and give them freedom to make mistakes and be okay with that and teach and mentor. Once you get to that point as a leader, then it's lights out. The business will grow.
Mm-hmm.
But for years, I held the business back because I was not ready for that. I was not the CEO that the company needed, and it limped along until I became that.
Yeah, and I applaud both of you, and maybe that's why you guys have got so much more money than me, because you did the right thing with those partnerships, and you were great. In fact, if I could wave my magic wand, wouldn't it be lovely if we didn't have to have contracts and employment agreements and sales agreements, and everyone did what they said? And I just wanted to let the viewers and listeners know my first comment about what Brandon did being unconventional is that in most cases, whenever it comes to equity, it's usually a earned over a period of time in which there's some vesting schedule. And the fact that upfront Brandon went and did that is actually a huge indicator of his confidence in the team, and he bought the confidence as well in a two-way kind of a relationship, which is extraordinary. It's a not normal in a good way, and I wish we had more of that.
Yeah, I think Binoy, I think I learned this from a wise coach. It just comes down to that abundance mindset versus the fixed mindset. And there's plenty of money that can be made, and everybody can win. It doesn't need to be just the founder or the CEO. Like, everybody can win, but that's a hard philosophy to buy into if you don't have that. If you have the scarcity mindset, you're born with that or you're raised around that, to kind of say, hey, I'm actually better with the team, and it's okay for everybody to win, and I'm going to make several people extremely wealthy if this works. And great. I mean, that paid dividends to me. It came all back to me just fine, and being generous like that. I've had other partners that did the same thing with me, where I was a minority shareholder. They gave me a chance. They gave me a little bit of the points, and they taught me and brought me along, and I provided some value, but maybe not as much as I needed to. But they were generous with me, and then I learned, and I'll definitely pay it back if I can.
Yeah,
great. Both of you, I'm looking at both Ike and Brandon, are excellent when it comes to communicating with people, the vision. You know how to sell. I have often found that those who succeed better in their startups have the ability to connect, to establish rapport quickly, and then to be able to convince and commit people to take action. You two both do that. And I think that's an important part of why success happens especially when you're starting from scratch.
I don't know if it's Brandon. Maybe I don't know if you're gonna agree, but to me it's not selling. Like even with this business, like I am 100% committed to making something that's gonna change lives. It's gonna impact in a big way, and then leave a mark on Earth when I'm gone. So I came to this conclusion, so I'm living it. So when I tell the story that, when I this is what I'm working for, like this is what I'm building, this is what it's gonna do, to me it's not selling. It's like this is just me at the core, and then I choose to be busy doing this. I don't try to even convince anybody. Just tell my story, tell how I feel.
Got it.
Yeah. I think whenever you start a business, I think we're saying the same thing. Like, the most important thing you as a CEO or a founder can do is kind of decide what that vision is, what is that purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? Why? Is it for money? Is it to leave your mark on the world? Is it to create jobs, bless families? Whatever it is, like you just need to get it out and get it on paper and get it in front of your people. And if it's a worthy cause, if it's beautiful, if it's doing good, most people will buy into it. And we certainly had to go through that exercise as we were very young and didn't have money to maybe compete with some of the higher salaries. You have a purpose, you have a culture that you're creating, you have this camaraderie, or you set the pace as a leader and be the example where people want to be like you. And any of those things would work. To answer your question, Binoy, I think like the most, like if I were to think of like the top 1, 2, 3 things that a founder needs in terms of a skill set, I agree that I think if you have the ability to sell, it's probably the most important thing that you could have. And if you have the ability to kind of communicate what your value add is, or what you bring to the market, and do it well and effectively and with charisma, and get people to engage, buy, or build that relationship, like that's huge, especially in the beginning. It just gives you traction, gives you a little bit of revenue. Revenue buys you time to fix operations and get all your ducks in a row. And then I think the second thing I would say is, as a leader, you have to be emotionally intelligent. You have to have a high EQ where you're able to read the room, that you're able to connect with people and understand where they're coming from and how to position them so that they can win at their job, or provide the most amount of value to the organization. If can read that to the people you're selling to, or you understand what their needs are, so you match your product mix or what you do, your service, to that exact customer. So sales and EQ, those 2 things in my book are like probably the most important things to have if you want to be a founder or CEO.
Cool. I love the topics. You've interspersed some more topics in what you just said, and I'd love to get some stories with some of these responses. You also talked about how the startup is not for everyone because it taxes you in many ways, and you also mentioned how it taxes at home, at work, yes, but at home as well. Tell us what experiences you've had, what you had to do to overcome that as well, because everybody here wants to see hope and find hope, and some examples of how other people have done it.
Yeah. Well, I think my story, is probably pretty unique in some adversity that I had to face as I was growing a business. Without getting too deep into it, we basically, me and some friends, started a medical equipment business right out of college. We were really good at sales. We blew it up. We scaled. I have a lot of respect to those partners that I had in those early days, because I was only a 5 or 10% owner at the time, and we mortgaged our houses and signed leases we shouldn't have done, and like borrowed. I think at one point we had $10 million to one vendor of debt, and we were bootstrapping. We were just flying by the seat of our pants. We were all in our 20s growing this business, and we knew sales, but we did not have the technology. We did not have the operational expertise, the inventory control. We didn't manage COGS correctly. We didn't look at our labor like a hawk, and we got into deep trouble. It was very challenging. Cash flow challenges. Every single meeting was about cash flow and the lack thereof, and we were yelling at each other around a conference table, and none of us had any really experience. We were just all learning together how to do it. And we weren't smart enough to bring in those consultants. And I don't even know if we could have recruited them in if we could. We were so, raw and scrappy and just not experienced. What made it worse was we had a situation where one day, I'm in Chicago. I'm running 6 or 7 offices. And in one of our branches, we had a bunch of FBI agents show up. And they took the computers, and they were scaring everybody, and it was terrifying. And it started a period of time, which is, I call it my darkest hour. And it wasn't just a day or a year; it lasted 7 years actually. And it was terrifying. It was we didn't know what to expect. We had no experience with this. We didn't have any idea what to do. And so I had partners taken off. We had banks kicking us out of the banks and said, "You got to get your money out of here. We want nothing to do with you." And that was the scenario. That was the time I got invited to move from a minority shareholder and take on more responsibility and eventually be the CEO. I cut my teeth as a founder under those circumstances. I was negotiating with the FBI, the Department of Justice. I was trying to, shoulder this so the employees didn't find out or competitors didn't find out. And we were, I watched some people that I love dearly get in trouble for some of the stuff that happened. And it was terrible, especially terrible on my family. When you go through that, it takes its toll on you personally, and on your family. And I was no exception to that. So what ended up happening is several partners left. There's a few of us that remained, and we thought, we can, we weren't involved, or we had nothing to do with this. And there's hundreds of employees that are still here. We owe it to them to find a way to make this right and to move forward and not let this cause the company to have to be shut down. And so me and one other partner specifically, we decided to take that on. And we had to go through several painful rifts where we took people that had nothing to do with this, that didn't do anything wrong, had to lose their jobs over that. And when you go in those rooms, that's a hard day when you have to go in there and tell a person that you care about, who has a family, that, hey, because of things that you did not do, we have to let you go. And it's terrible. I still have nightmares from two specifically where we had to do larger ones. We sold off divisions. We dropped product lines. We changed banks and found somebody that would work with us. We begged our vendors to kind of be patient with us, and as this played out, and in the end, we were able to kind of keep the doors open and keep going. The other partner of mine who stayed he was a type A alpha male, very similar to me. And we both had different ideas of how to run this company and how to make things right and how to take care of, the employees. And in the end, we sought permission from the government to kind of split the company in half. And I took half and became the CEO of half of that company. And this gentleman took the other half, but we had to kind of work together with the government to get to a settlement. What we thought would be, a couple $1 million ended up being a lot more than that, and a ton in lawyers. And it set us back decades, or at least a decade. It was tough. So when I say in the beginning, like, hey, it's not for everybody, like that is not a normal, that usually doesn't knock on everybody's door. You probably will never have to go through that. So please don't be scared and not start a business because of that. But you have to be willing to go through some very hard things. And, this was particularly hard because, without getting too deep into the specifics of what happened, but when the government found out that it wasn't systemic across all of our offices nationwide, it was isolated to a small group, they kind of put us on the back burner. And they said, hey, we have some bigger cases to go after. We'll circle back with you guys, which was not ideal for us because we're unable to get contracts. We're unable to get banking, credit. And we just had to be like, well, we have to have resolution so we can move forward. But for 5 years, they would not make a decision. And when the statute of limitations was up, we got a call that said, hey, we need you to sign this thing called a tolling agreement. And I'm like, what the hell's a tolling agreement? I have no idea what a tolling agreement is. So that would voluntarily extend the statute of limitations so that they can drill me. I was like, I'm going to voluntarily allow you to have more time to hurt me when I've already been so hurt through this whole process. So anyway, we got to we negotiated for our lives. We did everything we could to cooperate and try to do the right thing, and eventually got to a settlement that it was hard. It was hard, but we got to something we could live with, and then we started that long process of digging our way out of it. So, Binoy, how does that impact a family? It destroys families. It's really hard. When you're home. At the same time, when I was doing this, I was in an LDS bishopric. I had 5 kids under 7 years old, and I'm running through this. And when you start to get depression and you lose hope, and you're hiding this from all the employees so that they don't get distracted. You need revenue. You need optimism. So you're trying to shoulder this. I remember going behind one of our stores. I'm in my car, and I drive it to the other side of the parking lot, and I'm weeping just because I'm so scared. That's just part of, if you want to do big things, you got to be prepared to take those kind of punches. It was hard on my wife. It was hard on our marriage. It totally fell apart in the middle of all that. I would be home, but I wasn't really home. I was in that deposition. I was in that cash meeting where we're like, how do we pay these bills? Who do we pay first? We can't pay everybody. How do I tell the sales team that we're going to delay commission? You're battling to get to cash flow, to profitability. No one knows it. No one sees it, but that's what's happening behind the scenes. We eventually made it. And I was lucky that I had this wonderful, beautiful wife that was willing to, rather than be a statistic and just divorce, put our kids through that, put our families through that. Like she was willing, and with me, and we were willing to get professional help while we were going through that. And I think that's maybe something that I think founders ought to hear. If you decide to be a CEO and a founder, you absolutely need help around you. It's such a heavy load sometimes, especially as you start to scale and you get to 100, 200, 300, 400 employees, and you got all the complexity that goes with that. You're going to need a coach. You're going to need a therapist. You're going to need someone that's helping you think straight and evolve through those different phases and do it in a way that's healthy. Taking care of your health through that whole process. These are huge, important decisions that you got to get right. And I'm grateful that, you learn a lot through those types of situations. That's where you really grow. That's where you really see who you are and the type of man you're going to be: husband, father, neighbor, friend. That's where the rubber hits the pavement. So anyway,
wow,
crazy story. I know.
No, it's awesome you shared that with us. Thank you. I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think the founders are learners. We learn with the things that we act on every day as part of the startup. You obviously had a lot more difficult than most.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like that saying, the good sailors are not built in calm waters.
Correct.
That's all founders are all about. I think you just had the storm after storm after that never-ending storm.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also coming back to having partners, founders, having at work and at home. Is founders, I think, have this syndrome that they need to solve the problems themselves sometimes, because you can share most of the stuff with your board members or investors or your employees. You're stuck, but you need an outlet. Maybe it's a gun, hobby, like
Yeah.
you had, but you need an outlet for sure.
Yeah.
What this has reminded me of, Brandon, thank you for sharing that. story, that we all go through an equivalent to the level that we are capable of handling, and then maybe some more. And we all have stories, and I can also contribute our stories on this topic. Biggest thing that I've learned is, and it's something along the lines of, there's a very famous author, Tim Clark, who writes about psychological safety, and he says that learning agility is the ability to keep up with the speed of change. Listen to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Learning agility is the ability to keep up with the speed of change. I love that definition, because that's what a founder does. At any point in time, something's going to break, something's going to come at you at 90 degrees and T-bone you, and you've got to be willing to change and adapt and quickly pivot for that new intrusion, for that new obstacle, for that new threat, whether it be to the family or for the business. It's always coming.
Yep.
It's always coming.
Yeah, and I also say, like, the opportunities as you're hitting the different levels of success and profitability, and different rounds of funding and such, like that change, it's you have to change over and over again.
Yep.
And yeah, if you don't, you lose opportunity, or you lose market share, you miss the ball. But yeah, I would say that's one of the most important things that a founder needs to be not afraid of, is just like, hey, we will discover new and better ways of doing things, or new opportunities. And if it fits with our core thesis and our strategy, like we have to do it as fast as we can and hit the market fast. And I remember several times in our business where we pivoted entire product lines because we found a niche, we found an opportunity, we find a demand or something that was not being met by anybody else, and it made all the difference. And I would say also, I think it really comes down to the leader too. Like the CEO has to continually evolve and get better and better. When I talk to friends that own businesses, that they're in charge, they're the CEO. Like I often will ask them, I'm like, are you the CEO the business needs right now, or do you need someone better than you are, or do you want to take a little bit longer road and you kind of work to become who that CEO that business needs at this point? Or you just got to know there's a trade-off. If you're not ready for that, the business is going to be held back until you rise to the occasion. The alternative is just to hire someone that's better than you, someone that's got more time in the saddle, and that's okay too. I mean, it doesn't impact your equity unless you give it away. But I was in my situation, I didn't have the opportunity to do that. When you're under investigation or you have all these legal problems, and it's really hard to recruit a CEO that's better than you. So you just have to get better really, really fast. And
but there's a lot of checking the egos there, right? Like some of the things you said, like pivot the product, right? Like if for a founder to be successful, you have to commit to it. Committing means like you give everything you've got to this one, but it is so hard to come to a conclusion that, oh my God, the thing that I've been passionate about needs to pivot, change. I may have to abandon it.
Yeah.
Right? And the same thing with your role. Oh my God, like my drive is actually created this company. I came to this level of maturity. Are you saying I should give up and then bring somebody else? Like that is a lot of ego checking. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, if you're a tech company and you've got investors and that's probably much harder to do something like that. You have to involve the board and all that. But I was part of a small ownership group. We were private equity. We owned it, and it was my company. So, yeah, you just have to get to the point where you're like, what does the business need? And am I that guy? Am I ready for that? Or is the return on our investment going to be so much greater if I step out of the way and get other people into those right seats? I'd like to think that It's 20 years later running businesses. Like now I get it. Now it's easy to control the ego, and I just don't care anymore. But in 2010, 2012, when I was just getting into that, like, yeah, I probably had all kinds of ego problems. In fact, I had to hire a coach through that to knock down walls of PTSD and risk and get my head right after going through that. And I was, like I said, I was not ready to be the CEO, and I held the business back for so long. My ego probably got in the way. And it wasn't until I did some heavy internal work that we were able to change that. You guys might know this guy I hired. His name was Binoy.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah.
They say he's good.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's all
Sounds
right.
like a shifty name. Don't trust that. Hey, thank you, Brandon. Hey, but what I brought up is an important topic that you highlighted first. When you have to shoulder the burden and be the tip of the spear, and then you find out that you're going in the wrong direction, it takes a lot of guts to kind of self-correct. And yet every time I've worked with lots of companies that have succeeded, they're the ones that are taking action faster than anybody else. Whatever that action is, different product, different pricing, different sales VP in place, and whatever it is, even if it's getting a coach for themselves, they took action. And I've seen that the more frequent the corrective changes are, the more likely the business will succeed. No matter whether or not the CEO founder was a genius, was a product guru, was a sales guru, the constant changes tells me, oh, okay, they're ready to do that. Because I've also got stories of other founders who stayed the course. Most of them do not survive. If they don't already have cash flow telling them that things are wrong, they've got customers with high churn rates, talented employees leaving. That should be a big clue, a big slap in the face that it's something to do with them as the founder. And it's I think it's an important highlight for this discussion here for our listeners and viewers. It's an important one.
Yeah.
Change fast.
Yeah. And if you don't have some outlet or someone that can tell you the truth, sometimes you can't see it. It's not even crossing your mind. And that's why, like, the best leaders, I think, are those that have a level of humility where they are seeking feedback, maybe not from all their direct reports, but from somebody saying, hey, what am I missing? Where's my ego getting in the way? What am I not seeing here? And if you have the humility to ask that question and to really listen and not think you know it all, oftentimes that allows you to change quicker and pivot or rise to the occasion or fill that blind spot. And yeah, I've seen this over and over again across multiple businesses. Does that leader, is he self-aware, or is she self-aware and seeking to improve? Some are and some aren't. There was a time I wasn't, and then there's a time I was very aware of where I was lacking and willing to address it, and put people around me that can, fill it in. And
yeah.
Thank you. I've got one topic we have to hit before time always runs out. You are also one of them, for me, very instrumental, and you are an inspiration. Even from early on, you knew how to invest your whatever little money you had in not just your business. You knew that you had to, because most of us startup guys only put our money in our business. That's it. We don't diversify. But you started a long time ago to be wise enough to have a plan to divest and get things going. I think that's a huge gaping hole in most of us founders. And I've talked to too many.
yeah,
I'm not making this up. And you've talked to them too. They do not have a plan for how to make their money, to grow their money smarter.
yeah.
What have you learned?
Oh, I love this question. Yeah. So, yeah, this is, I think everybody was guilty at this at one point in their life. So if I have the chance to meet, I have lots of friends that are business owners. And one of the things we often talk about is yeah, they say, hey, I can get a better return on my dollars if I just throw it into my company. I can control it. I know where it's at. I think I get 20 or 30, 40% on my money versus trusting any other type of investment. And I think that is true, but it can't be that way in the beginning. I think it'd be crazy and irresponsible and too much risk for a founder and his family or her family to put all their eggs in private equity and have everything riding on whether or not this startup goes. So the key, what I counsel people do is like, it's so important you get the money out of that business, that whole pay yourself first principle, and you get several income streams as fast as you can, even if it's baby steps. And you do that for your family, and you do that to make sure. Now, in my situation, because of that story I told you, I wish I was smart enough just to come to that conclusion myself and just decide to do that because I read it in a book or heard it on a podcast. I didn't. I was forced to make that decision out of just terror, out of fear. When I was not sure if we could keep the doors open or if I had a way through or if the government's going to shut it down, like I immediately was looking for anyone to help me, create a plan that I could have a plan B if I needed it. And I was lucky enough. I had a dear friend that was willing to coach me, and this was in like 2011, right when this terrible period of time started. And he said, "Hey, if you can't make it through, let's get some other stuff going." And he's like, "I want to teach you. I want to show you. Here's how you register a business and you pull an EIN and you link a bank account to it. And I want you to save up all your money. And as soon as you have 25 grand, we're going to go buy something." And so we did that. Right? So I had this little LLC. I had a bank account, and we deployed the first check. And it was probably a fund in some apartment complex or something like that. And then the next year we did 2. And then we did a third, 3 that third year. And I started to like look at deals and learn how to understand how they're structured and what the pref is and what's the waterfall and is this risky? Do these people have any experience doing what they're doing? And how did they do in 2008 when the markets turned? And like you start to ask the right questions and slowly make better decisions with these investments. And then this was my plan B. If our company got shut down, I was gonna hopefully I'd have at least some money coming in the form of dividends from these different investments. I was looking for investments that kick out some yield that I could possibly live off of or help live off of if I didn't have an income. But luckily I continued to scrap, and we fought as a company, and we stayed in business, and those dividends just kept rolling and rolling and rolling. And you do that for a decade, guys. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you got a pretty cool little company that's got 50 K1s coming into it and kicking out money. And there was a point where that income exceeded my salary at this company I was telling you about. So then it's lights out. Then you're like, I don't have to worry. Like if this goes down, like there's some security for my wife and my children and college and marriages and all the pressure that dads have on providing. There's a little bit of peace at the end of the tunnel. We were lucky that, we got to the point where we grew our medical business and we had an exit. We sold it to a private equity, and we injected even more money into this little company I had, and it all worked out. And I never had to use it as a plan B. Plan B just never was implemented. It just kind of grew next to my other company. And I learned that's what I tell everybody. You got to do some version of that. Even if it's not a company, whether it's you're just throwing money into Wall Street, or you're buying a rental property, or another business where you're a passive investor in it. You're not it's not taking your time. You're just you provide capital, and you maybe encourage and consult a tiny bit, but you're able to focus on your main business. But you have something on the side going. It's just too risky not to do it that way. So I would encourage, if anybody listening to this is, if you got all your eggs in your business, this is like the cardinal sin of most entrepreneurs. And we put our families through hell when we do that. I've got so many close friends that's exactly what they're doing right now. And if it works, they're geniuses. It's going to be all great. They're going to have this huge exit. They're going to pull money off at A, B, and C and be all right. But it's rare. I mean, 90% of these businesses don't go. And you've put all your eggs and blood, sweat, and tears into it. And then you have to like go face your loved ones and say, didn't work. And, oh, by the way, and we're not prepared financially. Now we have to go to, ramen noodles again, like we were in college. So that's my opinion. That's how I would recommend if I was coaching anybody that's doing a startup, like get the money out.
I needed that coaching
20
years ago, 30 years ago.
But later on, like once the business is stabilized, once it's cash flowing and there's oxygen, everything's working great. If you want to then shift and say, okay, my plan B I don't need to plow as much into my plan B. Like I can put more money into this venture because it's got legs now and I could get a higher return. That's when you do it. That's great. You have your house in order. You've got your emergency fund set up. You got some other income coming in. And then now you're just making a risk decision that I'm going to put my money in what I know that's got legs, that's got upside. It's been de-risked at this point. Then go for it. That's lights out. There's a time we did that too, and threw it all into the company. Didn't take any money out because we knew, based on the phone calls we were getting, and we had a healthy EBITDA and multiples were great. There's liquidity in the markets. We knew we were getting close. So yeah, we put everything into the business those years, and then you transact, and it's great.
Yeah, this is gold.
Isn't it?
For that, and then just for these technical founders saying like, oh, Brandon's case is unique and all that, it's not. But like I experienced this when I had my Series A in the previous company. With the Series A, the VC suggested 10% of the money that they're giving to company. It's okay for founders to take it. And we did. So like if you're a founder, don't be cocky and say, no, I want to keep that equity in the company because I'm gonna double, triple it and all that. No, get like you have worked so hard to come to this level so you can de-risk a little bit of your life and your family or whoever you're supporting, right? Take it. And if you invest that in better, maybe you shouldn't buy a Ferrari with that. But yes, Brandon, that was a very good advice, I think.
It wasn't it.
Speaking of Ferraris,
yeah,
I don't have a Ferrari,
but Porsche.
No, nothing. I drive a pickup truck. What I do think is important, and we live in a society where like shiny things are awesome, and there's lots of people that live pretty large, and it kind of goes with the territory. If you have a successful company, especially a tech company in Lehigh, I think another piece of advice we ought to share is just if we could delay that as much as possible. Even if you're in a Series A and you get a chunk of money, pretend you didn't even get it. Just put it to work. Have that be that's your security for all your hard work, and then delay the uptick of your lifestyle as long as you can, so that your house is in order and you can take a little bit more risk towards the end as it gets really close to a larger transaction. Like I was forced to be extremely frugal and live with my means, use cars, plow everything into investments because we couldn't take money out of the company. We couldn't live large while have this pending case and stuff. So I was forced to do that. But I always admire those founders and those guys that have a really successful business, but they stay grounded. They keep it real. They're not all over Instagram with jets and planes and cars and all that stuff when it's it's investors' money still. They haven't transacted and return capital to all the LPs that made that possible. then after that happens, then enjoy the money and do good with it, and money will make you more of who you already are, and hopefully that's a good person. So
wow, what an ending. Look at that. Thank you. We needed that. I needed to hear that. Ike, wasn't he great, right? Brandon, stud. Thanks so much. We have had a beautiful podcast thanks to your wisdom, hard-earned, painful. And you could feel the tension come as you were telling the stories. So, and the wisdom that you've come through. Congratulations. And
thank you. I feel bad. There's I think of I've been doing this for 20 or 25 years now, and you have all these lessons that you learned, and so many different strategies and things that every founder ought to be doing. Maybe if you guys invite me back, I'll share you the top 10 of those things that I learned through those hard years. But
you're on.
Yeah, of course. You had us.
You're on. That was just too good. We needed a round 2 with you.
Yeah.
And we appreciated it. Everybody, Ike, right?
Yes.
Everybody. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to call it quits. What a fantastic episode we had with Brandon. And we will have him back because he said he would help us with 10 to 12 tips. We'll take him up on it.
Yeah,
so,
no
Brandon,
problem.
thanks so much. Thanks everyone.
Guys.
Appreciate it.